Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to have Annalise with us today. It's really an honor. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but so glad to have you today, Annalise.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Bobby. I'm thrilled to be here. I am Chief People Officer at CampMinder, which is a technology company. We make software for summer camps. I've been with the company for almost 9 years. Prior to that, I was also in a people and culture role within a technology company. So that's been the arc of my career. I spend my time thinking deeply about the employee experience, what kind of team we're building, what kind of culture we're creating. And a big part of that culture is ensuring a place where people feel respected. So I'm really thrilled to be here today to discuss that with you.
Thank you so much. What an honor. And I make up the business you're in is very purpose-driven, where you're really helping people, yeah, kids and people who go to camps, really bring in the joy that I believe all humans deserve.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, our core values are inspired by the summer camp experience. One of those values is give joy, which is about creating that hospitable experience where people feel good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So let's dive in. How do you define respect in the workplace, Annalise?
I define respect in the workplace as a place where people are seen for who they are. And that means that we acknowledge that everyone is bringing their own human experience with them to work. So their own stories, their own lenses, their own cultural context. And respect means that we recognize that richness and those differences, and that we recognize that everyone has as complex of an interior life as we do, and that these are other human beings we're working alongside who are just as worthy as we are of being truly seen, valued, listened to, and appreciated for who they are.
I love it. I'm going to insert, I've said it a couple of times with guests, but you've taken me right there. I love that Oprah Winfrey. Firstly, I love to quote data from large, organizations like Gartner and McKinsey and other consulting firms. But this data point is Oprah Winfrey at the end of her 25-year show was the only time that last episode was the only time she did a monologue. And it's
Mm,
full of her wisdom of, having interviewed over 30,000 people. And here's what she said that ties with your definition of respect. She said every single one of those 30,000 people, from the topmost celebrities and leaders of the world to average everyday folks, had one thing in common: validation. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Does what I say matter to you? I love that.
that's exactly right. I love that too. At the end of the day, everyone wants to know that they're seen and that they are valued for who they are.
Yeah. So, next question that we go to always is how do you know when a company culture has a culture of respect?
I think it shows up in a few ways. I think a big way that it shows up is in how we listen and the culture around listening within a company. And what I mean by that is there a practice of listening that is encoded in the values in some way and that also shows up and in a way where people are listening not just to defend their own opinion or waiting to speak, but are in truly listening to understand. And that means that people are truly present and are able to be in a conversation and really hear what's being said and also hear what's not being said and be curious about that and be able to really dig into the root of the issue, not just stay at the surface. So, creating enough space, enough presence in the conversation to truly hear and understand someone's perspective, be able to hold that perspective even when it differs from their own. And I think another indication that respect is present in an organization is in the way that leaders treat everyone within the organization, not just other leaders, but the most sort of junior frontline worker, that there is a consistent level of empathy, of acknowledgement, of validation, to Oprah's point, and of listening, as I mentioned. And that leaders are modeling that in all conversations, even with folks who within the org chart have much less power than they do.
Yeah, thank you. You've really literally laid out the first three steps in the framework of respect quotient. Firstly, that I do believe that any conversation needs structure, it needs context, right? What's the agenda? What are we talking about? What's the situation or a decision that was made? So we have that framing. And then next is really that there's willingness on the part of, let's say, one-to-one, two parties or two teams to come together to discuss that topic. And then, yeah, the three letters that begin the respect framework are, like you said, recognize that we're different and empathize with each other. And then that S is spaciousness, right? Like we pause and we give it space. It's not a quick 30-minute meeting. It's not a gotta run to the next meeting. It's an offsite, it's a meal. It's where you're really not forcing it to just run through it. And truly, because when you're describing active listening, what I got from that is exactly the essence of it, is I think it's much more, often that term is used a lot, but often it's like, don't interrupt. It's much deeper than that. That's the basics. Of course, we don't interrupt. That's respectful. But am I really listening to what you're saying? Or am I, waiting to add my 2 cents, right? So that's why it's a very deliberate process of hearing both sides, especially when there's disagreement, and trying to find alignment, because that's the bridge. Is after each party has spoken, they pause, they check for clarity, they share ahas of, gee, I never saw it that way, thank you, before proceeding to actioning, which is the PECT part.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
Thanks. So let's go to the reverse. How do you know when it's not present? And how do you handle that as a leader? And what do you do?
Yeah, I think specifically in the workplace, an indication to me that respect is not present is beyond just the basics of, are people listening to each other and able to have civil conversations with each other. It's actually going deeper and understanding whether people who are going to be affected by decisions and by changes are brought into those processes as stakeholders. And this goes back to what I was saying about leadership extending respect to everyone across the organization, regardless of level, regardless of role, regardless of background. Are decisions being made that affect the people throughout the organization in a way that takes their experiences into account and actually asks for their opinion and brings them into the process of shaping that decision? Or are they just being made in a vacuum at an executive level and then rolled out to everyone, regardless of how it impacts them? And are we even taking the time to understand how it impacts them? So it doesn't mean that we make all decisions by consensus or that we need everyone in the organization to agree or be on board with every decision. But do we understand their point of view? Do we understand the impact to them? Are we taking that into account in a meaningful way in our decision making, especially for those of us, who are in positions of power? I think a great example of this that's being played out in workplaces right now is the conversation around returning to the office. And, I think that this is not about just doing exactly what employees want or necessarily trying to make everyone happy, but it's the question of, are leaders, are those in a position of power actually engaging in meaningful and good faith conversations with their workforces to understand their experiences, understand what impact this has on them, understand their day-to-day lives and realities and how this would change those day-to-day lives and realities, and then genuinely taking that input into account.
Yeah, thank you so much for laying that out. I think, a gap in leadership often is that lack of awareness on intent and impact. So you just gave a roadmap, a playbook for how to catch ourselves with that and be planful and strategic. in really doing that stakeholder analysis, truly listening to understand, not needing to jump to decision or responding to perspective, because there are always so many factors as a chief people officer with your C-suite leaders that someone in your position has to weigh. And then the final part I want to check with you, I think you're probably doing this, right, is also then reporting back on this is what we heard, and being as transparent as possible on these are the implications, this is what we are implementing and why. Is that fair? Like, is that happening?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a couple things I would add to that. It's not just collecting the input and making the decision, but then explaining back, well, here's why we made the decision we made. To your point, here's what we heard, and here's how we incorporated that, and here's why we landed where we landed. But then I think it also goes the other way because there is just as much power in creating empathy with the workforce about the business's needs. And here's actually what we're trying to accomplish as a business. Here's our strategy. Here's what we have an obligation to deliver to customers or to the board or to all of us as employees. And here's how we're going to do that. And here's why we're making this decision that we're making. So can you put yourself in the shoes of an executive having to make this decision and empathize with that? So I think creating that empathy and understanding actually goes both ways, from the workforce to the C-suite to the board, back down from the board to the C-suite to the workforce. The respect that you show when you trust employees at every level to understand and connect back to the bigger picture. And, I think sometimes it's easy to think, oh, we have to just simplify and give people only what they need to know and not any more than that. But actually, people feel really trusted and feel a sense of ownership when they are given that context. And so I think it's a sign of respect to empower people with that information about the broader business goals and then allow them to connect their work and their purpose to that.
Yeah, thanks. So let's close with your top tips. What are some ways that you can leave our listeners with that they can create more respect in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, I think that it really starts with self-respect and bringing ourselves to work in a way where we can show up grounded, we can show up calm, we can show up able to extend listening and empathy. And that starts with regulating our own nervous systems, especially as leaders, right? So are we taking care of our bodies, minds, and spirits in a way that allows us to show up and be respectful and model respect? So it's actually self-respect to me that's at the heart of building a respectful workplace. And then I think beyond that, scaling a culture of respect means encoding it in your core values and ensuring that your values speak to respect in some way, whether you use the word itself or not, and that then you are actually hiring, promoting, making performance decisions, and being willing to let people go if they're not living by that value. That's the only way to make it real and to really create company-wide accountability for demonstrating respect. So hiring is key, especially if you're hiring someone into a leadership or management position, because that's the person who's going to be modeling and creating a culture of respect within their team.
Fantastic. Super helpful. Well, thank you so much. It's been great to have you as a guest. I bet we'll have other occasions to bring you back as a guest. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Bobby.